Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, which is the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. To promote our declaration, we have volunteer activists, country contacts, and so do join us if you can, either by volunteering or donating, or come along to it. We've got a conference in the UK in London in the summer, in July, but that's going to be online as well. So you could participate either online by doing a talk or coming along to it, or come along in person, and it should be really nice. We've got a great panel today. We have 3 speakers, and then we're going to have news afterwards from USA, France, New Zealand and Canada. But first of all, we're going to have speakers, and we have Jasmine Sussex, who's here, and she's from Australia, so it's the middle of the night. So Jasmine, thank you so much for coming. And Jasmine's going to speak first, and her talk is "The Mother of All Battles: When Men Claim Breastfeeding as Their Own." Then the second speaker is going to be Lynne Pinches, who is a pool champion from the UK, and she was faced with playing a man, and she'll tell us her story and what happened. And we have Levey from the USA, and she's going to tell us about LBORI and WDI Lesbian Caucus submissions on gender stereotypes. So they're really significant. The United Nations, some of the policymakers there are trying to work out what to do about, or what to think about, gender stereotypes and the impact on women and lesbians. And Lauren Levey is going to tell us about that, which is going to be great. We're going to start off now with Jasmine Sussex. And Jasmine Sussex is a feminist, a breastfeeding advocate, and a mother of 3. And the title of Jasmine's talk is "Mother of All Battles: When Men Claim Breastfeeding as Their Own." So thank you so much, Jasmine, for coming, and over to you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a joy to be here on International Women's Day, and I'm coming to you from Melbourne, which is the land of the Wurundjeri people, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on here today, the elders past, present and emerging. And as it is International Women's Day, I'd like to pay particular respects to all the mothers, nanas, aunties, sisters, daughters, who've been birthing on this country since time began. And in that vein, I'd like to pay my respects to my mother, who you can see here on the screen, and her mother, and my daughter here, who's now 20. This is when she was 1 week old. So my favourite quote to help us understand the radical changes that we've seen in policy and law is from one of your excellent lawyers over there in the UK, Peter Daly. And obviously he's one of Mayor Forstadter's lawyers. And he said that transgenderism causes institutional insanity. And this is definitely my experience with the Australian Breastfeeding Association. I am currently defending, as Joe said, a vilification claim about male breastfeeding. My public statements on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube about the ethics of male breastfeeding have resulted in a complaint being lodged against me. And I received notification in November 2023 from the Queensland Human Rights Commission, which is actually the other end of the country. I live in Victoria, who was advised that they were investigating a complaint against me. So my mission for today is to try and explain what's happening in the world of universal lactation activism, and how sex realists like myself, a breastfeeding counsellor or a former breastfeeding counsellor, are trying to hold the line. So in February 2020, it all kicked off at a breastfeeding conference, and I stumbled into a conversation with a young breastfeeding counsellor who was talking about being at the Children's Gender Clinic here in Melbourne earlier that day, and was looking actively at socially transitioning her 4-year-old daughter. because of the case that I'm in, the vilification case, there are some things that I'm constrained in what I can say. But I just wanted to explain very briefly that conversation with the young counsellor resulted in me being reported to the Australian Breastfeeding Association for my view, which she also saw as vilification, that, you know, children cannot be born in the wrong body, and they certainly shouldn't be told that they can. So that was my first strike. And then later, the following year, in July 2021, I was sacked as a breastfeeding counsellor. So in November 2020, the inclusive language consultation came to the Australian Breastfeeding Association, and you know, it had been kicked off in most other breastfeeding charities around the world before that. We were sort of the last to go. And although the trans activists and allies within the ABA actually didn't manage to get their language change agenda across the line, they did manage to purge the ABA of the more vocal sex realist counsellors like myself. And we argued that dehumanising language like chest feeding parents and pregnant parents and chest feeding were really not acceptable, and as a result we were subject to mass complaints from the kind of inclusive parents brigade within the ABA. So I just want to take half a second to acknowledge those breastfeeding counsellors or mother supporters or group leaders, as they call them, in Lesbian, who have had the same thing happen to them. You know, like Ruth Lewis in Lesbian UK, and Marion Thompson in Lesbian USA, who obviously is one of the founders of Lesbian internationally, and she's amazing. And it's been really, you know, sad, but really good to see that. Well, not good to see, but in a way, the same thing has happened to all these amazing women around the world that happened to us back in 2021. And there's a solidarity in that, which is sort of surprisingly positive. So, and in Australia, there were 6 other counsellors who were sacked by the ABA, and they weren't, for professional reasons, able to be public with their identities. But I just wanted to pay my respects to them as well. So how did we manage to defeat chest feeding in Australia? You know, like most mothers who have used cloth nappies, you know, we know that sunshine is the best disinfectant and stain remover for that matter. And we really applied that kind of mum know-how to the takeover that was happening in the Breastfeeding Association, and got the media involved in reporting what was going on. So ironically, although I am the main whistleblower that's quoted in this story, if it wasn't for a fellow breastfeeding counsellor who's also a noted sex realist language academic in Australia, who's also quoted in this story, it never would have got up. And that's because the journalist that wrote this story, Bernard Lane, is a stickler for primary source journalism, and he didn't want to publish the story until this book here, the Breastfeeding, Chest Feeding and Human Milk Feeding book, was published. So I received a call from Professor Carleen Gribble around this time, who was actually really kind to me through the complaint process. And she explained that Bernard Lane was sniffing around about the guide. And she told me that the story was triggered by Rainbow Families, which were the partners with the ABA in producing this book. And Rainbow Families had really jumped the gun and released this horrendous photo to try and promote some breastfeeding education classes that ABA was running with Rainbow Families to release this book. And obviously you can see, you know, we've got a mother who's had her breasts removed here playing with her baby. And this photo really still brings me out in a rage rash. And I just still can't really believe that the ABA, which, you know, at its heart is really still a bastion of mumsy sensibleness, could ever work with these people. So my focus with the ABA was really all about not lending credibility to organisations like Rainbow Families, which encourages self-harming, dysphoric teenage girls to have their breasts removed. And, you know, of course, this means that they're never going to breastfeed their babies. So it was only after the Australian story was published that I really realised that the ABA was also welcoming men to breastfeeding in the name of inclusion. And this here is in May 2021, 12th of May 2021, when I became aware of the issue, as men were really carpet bombing ABA's Facebook page with these self-congratulatory comments about being able to induce breast milk with domperidone. So I responded and I called the ABA's attention to the complainant's presence. And honestly, I did genuinely expect that the ABA would be honest and protect its counsellors and explain that its counsellors are not in any way expected to help men to induce lactation and sabotage the mother-baby breastfeeding relationship. But I was sorely disappointed, and instead my comment was deleted very rapidly, and I was blocked from the national Facebook page, still am blocked. And I received notification that my comment was going to be added to my rap sheet for investigation. So I next became aware that I was being targeted in March 2023, and it was around this time that a woman in Queensland and I both received notification from Twitter that the Australian government had been in touch to advise that our tweets broke Australian laws. And it later turned out that eSafety had submitted informal complaints, which have recently been argued are in fact arguably unlawful to Twitter, because they implied that our tweets reached the threshold of adult cyber abuse, which they didn't actually investigate if they had or they hadn't. So anyway, in February 2023, we attempted to conciliate the disagreement about what constitutes appropriate care for a newborn at the Queensland Human Rights Commission. And unfortunately, the conciliation was unsuccessful and the matter was escalated to QCAT, which is our civil administrative tribunal, but it's in Queensland and I'm in Victoria. And this reporter, Carly Douglas, she works at the Herald Sun, which is the tabloid paper in my hometown. And I did speak to her about this story, but she did her own research as well. So, and I do actually remain none the wiser as to what it is that I said that was inaccurate about male breastfeeding being, as I say, an unethical experiment on newborns, which inevitably sabotages the mother-baby relationship. So I firmly believe that babies have a human right to his or her mother's milk, and that any competing milk source inevitably, as I think I've said a few times, sabotages the mother-baby relationship. And the fact is, men just don't have the physiology or the endocrinology to make anything more than a starvation quantity of an unstudied substance. And I believe that it's unethical for endocrinologists to conduct human milk experiments on unconsenting babies and their mothers, and particularly as it seems clear, and many of the endocrinologists concede that they're doing so to provide their male patients with gender ego gratification. So for these reasons and many more, I say that men shouldn't try to breastfeed. Thanks.
Okay, so we're going to now move on to our next speaker, who is Lynne Pinches. And Lynne is a pool champion, and she was faced with playing against a man who had the gender identity, the female gender identity. Thanks so much for coming, Lynne, to tell us about it.
What happened in my case, for anyone who doesn't know my story, we were offered in August 2023 a female only category by our organisations after having transgender players in our organisation for over 6 years. And when we were offered that, there was like an elation between the women that played, and you could feel like a kind of buzz at the next tournament, albeit a bit of a silent one because you still really weren't able to talk about it out loud. Um, and everyone was really happy about that. And then 8 weeks later, yeah, 8 weeks after that, in 2023, in October, they announced that actually, no, we're not going to have a female only category. We're going to reverse that decision and allow trans players to play again. And also added in non-binary into the policy at the same time, which wasn't there previously, and which made it even more of an open section for the women's section, just open for all, really, just free for all. A lady started a support group a few days after that happened, which I was really pleased about, and I was invited to that. And I stated in this group that I was never going to play against another man in a female tournament ever again, and that I'd had enough. Um, that was also said by Alexandra Cuno. Actually, she said it first, and I said, I'm with you on that. Totally agree. I'm going to do the same. And it was just unbelievable that a month after that happened, I got to only my fourth final in 30 years of playing pool, and was faced with a transgender player in the final. And I decided that I wasn't going to play, and I shook hands respectfully with my opponent and just told the referee, unfortunately, this isn't a fair match, so therefore I concede, but thank you very much for your time. And I walked away quietly. And um, since walking away, I've been bullied and harassed online. Um, been even had harassment in person at pool tournaments twice since conceding by a trans player and their partner. I spoke at an event in Norwich, and I had a bottle of water thrown at me after speaking. I knew I was going to do it, but right up until the last minute, if you watch the video of me conceding, you'll see that I don't know which way to go, because my head was telling me one thing and my heart was telling me something else the whole way up. Even though I told everyone, I'm not playing it, I'm not playing it. Even my sister said to me afterwards, I know you kept saying that you were going to do it, but I really didn't believe you would. I didn't
Yeah.
actually believe that you would do it. And I said, I went with my heart in the end, and I know it's not right. I just feel like, I'm 52 now, so I was 50 at the time. And I've come into the end of my playing career, if you like. I've got a terribly bad back, so I can't play much longer. And I've got two granddaughters who I haven't even put a cue in their hand, and they're 7 and 8. So, and I would have done already if I thought that the sport I'm playing in could offer them a fair field, and they can't at the
I mean,
moment.
hopefully it will change, and partly because of
Absolutely.
actions of people like you. Would you have won a lot of money, and is it very prestigious? Would it have been like
It was £1,000 to the winner, and the runner up got 500. So it was half the prize money. But actually, I said the tournament director came to me after I'd done it, and he said, I take it you still want your prize money. And I said, actually, no. I said, actually, I don't. I don't. You can keep the trophy, you can keep the prize money. It means absolutely nothing to me without fairness. I
hmm.
don't want the money. I said I was prepared to lose, I wasn't expecting to get anything. And he said, give me your bank details and we'll send it over. So they did send me the money. But you know, it's not the money at all. I have done so many interviews since this happened and been offered money for interviews, and I've turned every single penny down. I'm not a wealthy person at all. Because of my back, I only work 1 day a week. I don't have a lot of money at all. This is for me is not a financial thing. The solicitors, we have a legal case going now, and we raised £25,000 with your help and everybody else's help. The public, it's the public's money that's being spent. As it is with most of these cases, the money is raised mostly by the public, and and it's the only winners of the solicitors.
Why is it that it's not fair? Because, you know, we know things like boxing or something, you can really see why it's not fair. But in pool, what makes it unfair for men to compete against, or who say that they're women to compete against women?
I think there are several things. The power that men have in it's the cue power that they can do it with the things that they can do with the white ball that women cannot do. The break shot is the most important shot, and I did. You need to score a certain amount of points on the break for it not to be a foul break. So if you don't get score 3 points on the break, you have to get balls to come backwards past the halfway line. You get a point for every ball that you pot, and a point for every ball that comes backwards past the halfway line where the middle pockets are. And so I did like an experiment at a county game where I asked the men across all sections to record any foul breaks they had, not for the white going in the pocket or flying off the table, but just not scoring the 3 point rule. And we tested up. We had 44 games in the women's, and we had 4 foul breaks, so it was around 10%. And when I got the results back from the men afterwards, I was astounded because they played 178 versus our 44, and across all of the other 4 or 5 sections, they didn't have one, not one
And is
single
that
foul
because they're
break.
stronger? They just can hit
Yeah,
that first
yeah,
ball.
because the balls split better and they carry on. If you watch a man's break compared with most females, the balls carry on moving longer because they impact more power through the pack and they carry on moving. So you've got more chance of potting one, I think. Statistically, you definitely have more chance of potting one if you're a man, I would expect. I mean, this will all be what we're doing at the minute. I can tell you a little bit about the legal case because we did a GoFundMe, and a lot of that was written on our recent update on there, where we had to raise a further 5,000 because we ran out of money. Um, so what we're having is 2 experts working on whether pool is gender affected as per the Equality Act. Because if it is gender affected, then it's just they've discriminated against us. We feel like we've been discriminated against anyway by allowing men into our sport. But if we can prove it's gender affected for pool, then we can prove it for darts, golf, any sport, hockey, even though I think all of these sports are, they say they're non-contact, hockey and football, but we know contact takes place. They should be excluded anyway already. It's ridiculous. But if we can prove that for what they call precision sports, is gender affected, then they're going to have to just across the board do it. So this is like a landmark legal case, really, because if we do it in Q sports, darts and things, they all come under the same bracket, and we'll have if we win, we'll then have it set in stone forever that we can lawfully exclude from any sport. You know, any sport. They're all gender affected.
Yeah.
Every sport. There's
I
not a
mean,
single sport that men dominate, that
uh,
women, sorry, dominate at.
and you were saying that you've got 2 sons, and that those 2 sons,
Yeah,
it's just the moment they hit puberty, they became better than
yeah.
you,
I
even though
have
you've
now.
been
I've
playing it
got
for many
three
years.
sons
Oh,
now.
3,
I've
yeah.
got 3 sons now. I've got two that played at the time, played and have already overtaken. But my third son is only 10 years old at the moment, and he's playing pool now as well. Now, when my older two were younger, they got to sort of 13, 14, and they ended up getting stolen out of my Division 2 pool team that I was in by the Premier League players who said, can we please have him in our pool team? Because we think that we could, he's a great player and we think we could improve him even further. I'm not going to not let him go. So, I knew these men and I trusted them. So they took him under their wing, but it already improved to such a level beyond mine. Now, my 10-year-old, this is one statistic, like we're talking about the break shot. My highest brake speed, because we've got an app that we can test brake speed on, is 16.02 miles an hour. And my 10-year-old is 19.06 miles an hour. He's tiny. He weighs 6 stone and I'm like 11 stone. And I'm scratching my head going, what? No. So like the biggest woman in all the tests I did personally, because I was interested in the biology and somehow there's a way to prove this and stuff like that. So I did tests on brake speed, and the biggest woman I tested was at the time 19 stone and 6 foot tall, and she hit 19 miles an hour. Now that's what my 10-year-old hits. The smallest man was let me get this right. He was 8 stone and 5'2", and he hit 18.8. So he almost got as much as a 20 stone 6 foot woman in the brake power. And but through the sex categories, it does go in size kind of thing. So the bigger the man compared to the smaller the man, the higher the brake. And it's the same with the women. The smallest woman of the same height as the smallest man and the same weight only got 10 miles an hour.
Mm.
And to his 18.8. So there's a huge percentage, and that is just one thing. Now, in our legal case, we don't have to prove that there are 12 differences. We only have to prove that there's one. That's all, because there shouldn't be any. Not
Yeah. And
inherent
when
ones.
is the case coming up?
Well, ours is not. Ours is behind the scenes, sort of. We're not in litigation, but because we decided that if we could prove its gender effect and do it this way, we thought it would be quicker than going to court. But it's turned out actually to be quite a long process, and has been going on since October 23, so 15, 16 months now. But it's very close to coming to an end. And but there is another court case going on in our sport. We have two. There's our legal case where we are challenging the policy and the organisations and saying you've discriminated, and we want to look into it. And then on the other hand, you've got a trans player taking another organisation, a pool organisation, to court. Now that is happening next month, April the 7th to 11th in Canterbury Court in Kent. The English Blackball Pool Federation are being taken to court by Harriet Haynes for discrimination based on gender reassignment surgery as a protected characteristic. Now, to me, after reading a lot about the equality law in the last 16 months and being at a webinar with Michael Foran, the expert, as well, I heard him talk for an hour about it. So it was quite well, it was an eye opener to say the least. But I have always felt right from the beginning that you're not being excluded because of your gender reassignment surgery. You're being excluded because of your sex, because the
Yes.
categories are based
Yeah.
upon sex.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how it's got to court, because let's say hypothetically that Harriet Haynes was to win the court case, and Blackball then have to change their rules back to let Harriet play, and all the females got a part of that again. And so if Harriet was to win, as soon as the lady in charge of the Blackball organisation walks out of the court, any lady that plays for the Blackball organisation could hand her a letter saying, I am suing you for sex discrimination for letting men play in our sport if you're about to let that happen again. And there's thousands of women that play. So if they all collaborated in together and wrote a letter together, you're looking at a massive amount of money. So how can one person's success on a discrimination case then discriminate against thousands of others?
What's your feeling of the participants, the women who are playing? Do you think that they mostly agree with you? And what's going on? Are they being supportive, or some of them just saying we're going to put up with this?
No, there's a massive percentage that agrees. I would say it's only I'm going to be generous and say 5% are probably for it. That is it. It's a very small percentage that agree with it. And we know that since I conceded. We didn't know it before, because if you tried to talk about it, you were just backed, into a corner and told it we were not allowed to talk about that. Because one woman spoke publicly about this in our sport, actually. Her name's Helen, and she writ on we had the two transgender players drew each other in the final, got to the final together a couple of years ago. And this lady put on her Facebook, women's ultimate pool final, 2 men in the final. So someone commented and said, 2 men, what are you talking about? And they didn't know that Harriet was a male. So, and didn't believe it, quite frankly. They said, no way, that's not true. And so this lady put a photograph of the player pre-transition, and she was subsequently banned. She's still banned from playing in their events. And then that had a knock-on effect where she was then banned from her local county team, pool team, then playing for Wales, weren't allowed to play for Wales anymore. And then tried to join a different county and was with a mutual friend tried to join. She tried to join on both their behalf, and the mutual friend was told, "I'm happy for you. We're happy for you to join, but we don't think that Helen would be a good fit." Which
Yeah.
is so. And these were women. These were that was the way she was treated for speaking publicly. Was called transphobic for saying there's 2 men in the final, basically, because I've seen all of the paperwork that goes with all of these bans and stuff. I've seen it all. It's all true.
Mm.
And she was used as a scapegoat because a year later I walked away from that final, and yes, I've had a few women comments on Facebook, "You're a bigot, you're a transphobe," but there's such a tiny percentage, considering like what Jasmine said earlier about the public support that you get and the local support and from other pool players, because I mean, I haven't lost as much as other people. Jasmine's lost her job. Other people have lost their livelihoods and their reputations have been ruined. Um, I don't feel like I've lost anywhere. I've lost a bit of a mental health. I've got to tell you, it's been that's been tough mentally to take the abuse. But then I revert back and I remind myself of the nice comments, and I save little screenshots of them or things people have sent me that like, thank you so much for what you did, because I feel like I can go home and talk to my family about something that I haven't been able to talk to because I have a trans cousin or a trans friend or someone my mum works with is trans, or there always seems to be like an emotional attachment somewhere.
On the positive side, I mean, are you pleased that you walked away? Do you think that
Absolutely,
quite a lot
absolutely
of,
I
what
am.
sort of good things have happened
I mean,
for you by doing it?
um, just that women feel like they're able to talk about it, and that there's been a lot of women stand up and say, "No, I'm not playing your game either," because I think I was one of the first to actually say, to make a stand by just walking away from it and saying I'm not doing it anymore. And then there was a boxer did it after me about a week later, and then I saw a team had done it, and then the young shot putters all just walked away, and it just sort of went around different countries like a bit like a domino effect, one push, and then everyone sort of thought, well, actually, she's right. It isn't right. It's not about being kind. I am kind. I'm a kind person. I
Yeah,
am. Um, and it's not about kindness. I don't think anyone thought it through, because this isn't when they change it back and it does become all female, because it is going to happen eventually. It's now happening in the USA, so it's got to spread around the world eventually. When they do it, it's going to affect the mental health of these trans players as well. And that is something that, even though they put themselves into that situation by entering women's sports and stuff, to be part of something for 6 years or longer, or however long some have been hidden in there, and then have that taken away, it's still going to have a mental effect on you, whether it's a mental condition that caused that in the first place, or your gender dysphoria, if it's genuine or whatever. It's still going to affect them mentally as well. So I don't think that it's been thought through. It's got to stop. It's got to
yeah.
stop somewhere. They're
If they're
not thinking about the effect of their mental health now on the women that it's affecting. Harriet won the ladies' rankings a couple of years ago, and when you win that, you get sort of rewarded with a pro spot. So then that's amongst the open, which is all men, apart from Harriet and I think Emma Cunningham and Amy Beauchamp were in it as well. But Harriet finished ranked 74th in that,
amongst the men, yes.
amongst the men pros, but in the women pros have finished first. So, and finished first again
Yes.
this year. Um, there's tried being in the men's, but they did actually. Harriet said in a newspaper in an interview recently that she didn't want to be forced to play in a trans category or the open because that would reveal her identity, but that's already been sort of revealed, I would think, to this point that, most people know. Like, it went round the world when I conceded, so I don't think that
Yes.
by hiding the identity is way past that, so you can't really say that that's the reason you don't want to play in the open. And having played in the opens, plenty of opens before, you can't say that's the reason. But I don't think a trans separate category would work. It has to be open and female, or
Yeah.
male and female. I
Yeah.
don't mind at all if women are not allowed to play male sports, and I would like to say that as well. Um, I do think that you know women did fight for wanting to get to play into men's sports, but they're not going to, and that still hasn't happened where a woman has actually won a man's pro tournament when they've been in there. So they might win the first match and maybe they might win two, but that's probably the most anyone's ever got through in any women's kind of thing. So I do think
Yeah.
that that also takes opportunities away from amateur youth players that want to get those men's pro spots when they are given to women as a reward for doing well on a women's tour. I've always felt like that.
Yeah, that
So
is a
I,
good
I
point.
see it from both sides. So
Yeah,
two categories. It's
I
either
think,
got to be male and female or
yeah.
not male, open and
Yes,
female only.
and female, yeah. So we're going to now go to Lauren Levey. She is a board member of WDI USA, also serves as coordinator of its Lesbian Caucus and coordinator of its State Legislative Advocacy Team. She also serves as coordinator for Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI. And she's going to talk to us today about LBORI and the WDI Lesbian Caucus submissions on gender stereotypes. So thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on. And thank you for the work you've been doing, which is brilliant. So over to you.
The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, set out the sex-based rights of women. These rights were adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1979, and then they were further developed in subsequent years. As you may know, CEDAW forms the basis for WDI's Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights. The CEDAW committee recently solicited submissions from women and from women's organizations on the subject of gender stereotypes and how to combat them. The WDI USA Lesbian Caucus and the Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI, each submitted a statement in response. Let me tell you a bit about these two lesbian organizations. The WDI USA Lesbian Caucus is a team that I created in 2022. The first thing we did was write the Lesbian Bill of Rights, or the LBOR. This is a radical feminist lesbian document written in the form of a legislative bill that could be introduced in Congress or in any state legislature with minor modifications. It's basically a description of discriminatory circumstances that lesbians are subjected to, followed by a list of rights that we claim that would remedy those enumerated discriminatory circumstances. You can find the LBOR and every other article that the Lesbian Caucus has written on the WDI USA website, womensdeclarationusa.com. The WDI USA Lesbian Caucus requires that anything we do or write should be consistent with the LBOR as well as with the declaration. And we've written quite a lot of position papers on how to create lesbian communities in real life, on the 4B movement in the United States, on the problems with butch femme, and other radical feminist analyses about lesbians from a lesbian perspective. We've also submitted statements to government agencies, including USAID, for instance. In 2023, the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus was the founding member of Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI, which is an international network of radical feminist lesbian organizations. LBORI currently has 5 members. Radical feminist lesbian organizations are not so common, so please let me know if you're aware of one that's not in our network yet. LBORI's current member organizations include the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus, Lots Reloaded in Germany, Lesbian Resistance in New Zealand, Lesbian Action Group in Australia, Lesbicon in Norway, and Archilesbica in Italy. So that's the background so that you'll know who the players are here. As I mentioned, the CEDAW committee put out a call for statements by individuals and organizations to address the topic of gender stereotypes and how to combat them. LBORI and the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus each submitted a statement. The LBORI statement was drafted by Lucia Gianci, representing Archilesbica, our member organization in Italy, and the rest of us made additions and edits. I'll just read the whole thing. To the CEDAW Secretariat, Lesbian Bill of Rights International, or LBORI, is an international network of lesbian radical feminist organizations. Our principles are enumerated in the Lesbian Bill of Rights, or the LBOR. Gender stereotypes is a redundant expression because gender is the sum of stereotypes whereby society subjugates women. Gender is the cultural expression of the material oppression of women by men. For this reason, LBORI asks CEDAW and all governmental bodies to maintain the word sex in their recommendations and legislation to avoid conflating it or replacing it with gender. This clarity is crucial to the very survival of any lesbian community and to legal protection for women and girls as a sex class. Lesbians' rights, as it is for all women, are based on sex. UN Special Rapporteur Reem Al-Salem recently warned against erasing sex-based language, calling it a new form of violence against women. The language of gender is dangerous for women in general and for lesbians in particular because it paves the way to legitimizing the concept of gender identity and subsequently of the right of men to self-identify as women. Gender identity is a lie that some men could be born in the wrong sexed bodies and possess female souls. This lie is then used by men to appropriate women's rights, spaces, and opportunities. Being a human female is not a feeling, but a biological fact. Men as a sex class use this biological fact to subordinate women as a sex class. There is no such thing as a female soul in a male body, nor vice versa. In fact, there's not even a female soul in a female body, nor vice versa. Humans are fully embodied. No part of us exists apart from our bodies. We are our body, and the body is never the wrong one. The concept of a male or female soul is a reactionary one because it accepts gender stereotypes that are historically determined by the cultures, politics, and economics of the patriarchal oppression of all women and girls as a sex class. Lesbian spaces, community, and culture would be destroyed if men claiming they are women were considered lesbians and allowed by law to participate. Lesbians' sexual orientation is based on attraction to the female sex, not to feminine gender presentation. Lesbians can be masculine looking or feminine looking, but their romantic love and sexual attraction are for women, never for men who claim to be women. Moreover, an increasing number of young lesbians accepting the concept of gender identity are being medicalized all over the world. They are administered puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. Basically, the lie of gender identity allows the return of conversion therapy for the most vulnerable lesbians and other young women, forcing them to consider men as sexual partners. Transing of homosexuals is done explicitly as a conversion practice in very homophobic countries such as Iran. Finally, it should be noted that the gender identity agenda is unfortunately pushed by NGOs on women's associations around the globe through the power of funding to be given or denied, notwithstanding the fact that in most countries of the world, being born female is automatically a heavy burden and has nothing to do with the subjective claim of gender identity. There is no country in which any woman or girl can identify her way out of the pre-existing sex-based subjugation. Lesbian Bill of Rights International. And then I drafted the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus statement, which is longer and takes a different approach. To CEDAW, Women's Declaration International, WDI is a global nonpartisan group of volunteer women dedicated to protecting women's sex-based rights. Women's Declaration International USA Incorporated, that is WDI USA, is its US chapter. WDI promotes the Declaration on Women's Sex-Based Rights, or the Declaration, which has more than 39,000 signatures globally. The undersigned are the members of WDI USA's Lesbian Caucus. As radical feminists who are lesbians, we aim to abolish all gender, meaning sex stereotypes, not just transgender, but the entire spectrum of masculine to feminine, whether performed by a male or a female. Abolition of all gender is our aim because we understand that it is a system that functions to maintain the sex class of males as dominant and the sex class of females as subordinate. We aim to abolish that sex class system of dom-sub. In an article entitled, "Why Abolish Gender, What it Would Look Like and How to Do It," published on WDI USA's website, authors Lauren Levey, Fern Lopez, and Lorraine Nolan wrote the following. When gender is a pervasive system that each woman has internalized from the culture, as it surely must be to some degree, free choice in matters regarding our own presentations and behaviors is an illusion, because what feels like a choice is so heavily influenced by our internalized system of gender. For this reason, radical feminists don't primarily examine personal presentations and behaviors as to whether or not they were freely chosen. They ask whether particular presentations and behaviors support the liberation of the sex class comprised of women and girls, end quote. We encourage you to read that article in its entirety as it delves into the harms of gender stereotypes relating to Black women and to detransitioned and desisted women, in addition to lesbians. In this statement by the WDI USA Lesbian Caucus, we will focus on the harms of gender stereotypes relating to women as a class and lesbians in particular. Sheila Jeffries, one of the directors of WDI, has written and spoken extensively about harmful beauty practices, including in her 2005 book, Beauty and Misogyny. Jeffries describes how specific beauty practices, which exaggerate and enforce biological differences between the sexes, are typically framed either as natural or as freely chosen, and in any case, as being without generalizable culture-wide significance. She describes how these practices harm women individually and collectively, and for the purpose of enforcing the subordination of the female sex class. They harm women's health, diminish women's strength and mobility, and undermine women's dignity and ability to thrive as full humans entitled to full human rights. A partial list of such beauty practices includes transgender medicine, labiaplasty, anal bleaching, lip fillers, breast augmentation and mastectomy, body piercings, and clothing fashions such as shoes with high narrow heels and pointy toes, tight short skirts, long decorated fingernails, and plunging necklines. Jeffries explains that such practices are not freely chosen, which can be seen in the denial of privileges in public life to women who fail to adopt them. They are a condition of employment for most women in most high-paying jobs. These conditions support the domination-submission core of gender, with visible badges of subordination for women. While men in business attire have both feet planted with bodies covered in a dignified manner, their female counterparts teeter precariously on high heels, showing cleavage and other bare skin, unable to fully use their long-nailed fingers, and continuously having to move the required long hair out of their eyes, either by touching it or by tossing their heads. To gain precarious and conditional male acceptance of a woman's participation in public life, a woman is required to divert part of her attention away from her work and instead toward her self-conscious awareness of her impractical appearance and posture. The contrast in professional attire required for each sex like the veil in other cultures, makes the female's subordinate status visible at a glance so that she can be treated accordingly. Explicitly abolishing gender in law and policy would be a statement that femininity has nothing to do with being female, and that women have a right to live consistently as free, dignified, full human beings, having full agency. As to lesbians in particular, authors Levey, Lopez, and Nolan wrote the following. This is quoting from this article by Levey, Lopez, and Nolan, which can be found on the WDI USA website. What would the abolition of gender look like for lesbians? First, the stigma of lesbian would end. The Lesbian Bill of Rights defines a lesbian as, quote, a female homosexual or a woman or girl who is exclusively same-sex attracted. By definition, lesbians are taboo in patriarchy because, first, they deny sexual access to all men, and second, they demonstrate that women have sexual agency, that sexual desire and satisfaction occur for them without male involvement. Both taboos exist as a consequence of gender. That is, the patriarchal requirement of universal male supremacy. There must be no viable exceptions, or else the rationale for patriarchy disappears. Without the dom subcomponent of gender, the stigma of being a lesbian disappears along with patriarchy itself. Second, the institution of state-sanctioned marriage would disappear, we think. Its purpose has always been for the state to regulate and be a party to long-term sexual relationships in order to support patriarchy, to manage the ownership and inheritance of property accordingly, and to encourage heterosexual married couples to have lots of legitimate children, especially sons or heirs. Its marketing strategies involve romance, religion, soulmate ideology, and tax breaks and immigration privileges. Some of these perks have no value to the collective interests of women and girls as a sex class, or lesbians in particular. Others should not be tied to marital status, like immigration. There are ways of organizing communities other than isolating each woman away from her birth family in a household headed by a man. Third, lesbian motherhood would no longer be valorized. Once women, including lesbians, are understood to be fully human, with equal access to productive public life, lesbians, like other women, would not be pressured to bear even one child, and the choice to become a mother would not be made or seen in the context of femininity or women's nature. Furthermore, lesbian motherhood would not be lamented as, how sad that the poor baby has no daddy. Being raised by a community of lesbians could arguably be quite a rich upbringing for any child, especially in a culture where gender has been eliminated. The lesbian gender identities of butch and femme, discussed on YouTube by Sheila Jeffries and Lauren Levy in February of 2024, would disappear. Butch means masculine and femme means feminine. Some lesbians make an attempt to reframe butch as simply not feminine or as non-conforming to gender expectations for women. But in common usage, butch maps the swagger of male entitlement and domination. Although some lesbians feel strongly that lesbian genders are innate and immutable, and that butch or femme, for instance, is who they are, there is no scientific evidence to support biological innateness. Without the power and romance and mystique of masculinity and femininity, butch and femme would no longer have a cultural foundation. So we predict that lesbians would not only be functioning workers in the public sphere, as most are now, but would also appear as fully functioning workers. And fifth, absent social stigma, there would be a lot more women living openly and visibly as lesbians for two reasons. First, lesbians would no longer be excluded from public life generally. And two, lesbian communities would be welcoming to new lesbians, to women who are wondering if they might be lesbians, and to women who wish to become lesbians. And many of those open and visible lesbians would undoubtedly be taking the lead in creating new and more just structures of social organization post-patriarchy. Thanks.
Hello from Canada. In Canadian news this week, Redux reported that a 35-year-old Alberta father has been arrested and charged with aggravated assault after stabbing his 2 children, severing the esophagus of his 8-year-old daughter, who is currently in critical condition. Alice Michael Joseph Atwood, who uses she, they, he pronouns and describes himself as a gender-fluid queerdo, was held in the mental health ward of a hospital at the request of his family after he was released on bail. He was, however, released from that hold on February 25th against the wishes of his family, who are concerned about the safety risk he poses. In other news, Redux reports that a trans-identified man who is serving an indefinite prison sentence for sexual offenses, including the rape of a 13-year-old girl, is said to have sexually assaulted multiple female inmates after having been transferred to a women's prison in Ontario. The man, who goes by Carissa Marie Radcliffe, has an extensive history of sex crimes, including multiple rapes of teenage girls, and he was declared a dangerous offender in 2010, which means he must remain behind bars until a parole board deems him fit to be released. In 2017, shortly after being denied an appeal of his 2009 conviction and his 2010 indeterminate sentence, Radcliffe began to identify as a woman, changing his name and his pronouns. Radcliffe's victim, who's being called Maria, said that she's been living in fear, and prior to the attacks, Radcliffe had been behaving in a predatory manner, making lewd remarks and even going as far as telling her that she was younger than his last victim. Maria's roommate, who's being called Emma, was a first-hand witness of the abuse. Emma had previously faced sexual abuse at the hands of another trans-identified male inmate, Stephen Sam Mellenbacher, in 2020. Mellenbacher was being held in the Edmonton Institute for Women, but after sexually assaulting a female inmate there in 2019, was transferred to the Grand Valley Institute in Ontario, where he sexually abused Emma. To make matters worse, Maria is not Radcliffe's only victim. Multiple other women have filed reports with prison authorities. Once officials became aware of the assaults, Radcliffe was removed from the house he'd been staying in, House 11, and placed in a maximum security unit. Officers then began to interview all of the women who had been living in the house with him, and they learned that he had been walking around the housing unit wearing only a shirt, naked from the waist down, and exposing himself to the women. Radcliffe had only been in the unit for 2 weeks when he assaulted Maria. He'd previously been living in a housing unit for Indigenous women, but was transferred to House 11 due to reports of ongoing sexual harassment of the women there. It's now clear that violent offenders are being shuffled around women's prisons and prison units in Canada, being allowed to victimize vulnerable women with impunity. If this doesn't qualify as cruel and unusual punishment, I really don't know what does. And that's all I have for you from Canada today.
Our biggest advocacy push this past week concerns SB 9, the Protection of Women and Girls in Sports Act, which WDI USA has long supported. It's a simple and straightforward bill that would define sex accurately under Title IX and keep men and boys out of sports intended exclusively for women and girls in institutions funded by Title IX. When news broke that the bill was expected to imminently be brought to the Senate floor for a vote, we moved quickly to encourage signatories and volunteers to contact their senators, particularly their Democrat senators, and urge them to vote yes on the bill and broadcast similar information across our social media platforms. The bill was indeed brought to the floor for a vote yesterday, though it failed to clear an initial procedural hurdle on a 51-45 vote. It needed 60 votes to advance, which would have required at least seven Democrats to vote with all Republicans to move it. And disappointingly, not a single Democrat did. As Kara is here with us today, I'm sure she has more to say about this, so I'll stop there. Last week, I mentioned 15-year-old female athlete Frances Stout, a JV basketball player for the Tumwater School District in Washington State, on whose behalf FAIR recently filed a federal civil rights complaint against the district with the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, alleging sex-based discrimination in violation of Title IX after her concerns about the participation of a male athlete on the opposing team were ignored by school officials. Well, as a result of her brave actions, the Tumwater School District's Board of Directors just passed a resolution banning boys from participation in girls' sports. The resolution affirming a proposed amendment to Washington Interscholastic Athletic Association policy was passed with 3 yes votes and 1 abstention. According to board documents, Amendments 7 and 8 ensure that all students, regardless of sex, gender identity, or gender expression, who meet eligibility criteria are allowed to participate in the boys/open category, and to maintain fair and equitable competition, participation in the girls category is limited to students whose biological sex is female. And that's a quote. The meeting was immediately interrupted and shut down by the usual suspects, loudly chanting the usual nonsense. On Tuesday, the Maine House of Representatives voted to formally censure Representative Laurel Levey after she drew national attention for a Facebook post critical of the state's policy of allowing boys to participate in girls' sports. Her post took issue with the fact that male athlete Katie John Spencer had won a state title in girls pole vaulting. As a result of the censure, Libby will not be able to cast a vote or speak on the House floor until she issues an apology, which she has steadfastly refused to do. Thus far, Rep. Libby, is holding the line and taking every opportunity to bring more local and national attention to the issue. And as Kara wrote in her Female Free Speech Friday post, the stated reason for the censure is that she posted images of a minor, but anyone with eyes and ears can tell that she's being punished for the heresy of standing up for women and girls in her state. The images she posted were already publicly available, and it's abundantly clear from the proceedings that the men in charge don't think it's acceptable for her to speak out on the topic of male athletes competing in girls' sports. Also on Tuesday, U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi issued letters to officials in California, Maine, and Minnesota, warning them to comply with federal anti-discrimination laws that require them to keep men out of women's sports. This Department of Justice will defend women and does not tolerate state officials who ignore federal law. We will leverage every legal option necessary to ensure state compliance with federal law and President Trump's executive order protecting women's sports. Next, I'll give an update on Doe versus McHenry that is now being referred to in court documents as Doe versus Bondi, presumably reflecting Pam Bondi's now confirmed status as U.S. AG. James McHenry was the acting AG at the end of January when the complaint was first filed. Last week, I mentioned the amended complaint that added another 9 male plaintiffs to the original 3, seeking to halt their transfers to male facilities. On the 24th, plaintiffs' motion for temporary restraining order and expanded preliminary injunction was granted, which means that for now, the 12 male plaintiffs will remain in federal women's prison and continue to have access to hormones, etc. Additionally, Keep Prison Single Sex USA tweeted that on February 23rd, a manager at the Bureau of Prisons provided a declaration in support of the BOP's opposition to the expanded TRO request, which also included the following inmate data. As of February 20th, there are 2,198 inmates housed in federal BOP facilities and halfway houses who identify as the opposite sex. 1,488 are male inmates who ID as female, and 710 are female inmates who ID as male. Of those individuals, 22 are male inmates currently living in a female institution, with 1 female living in a male institution. That data is consistent with the findings of our Prison FOIA project, published in 2023, though the numbers have gone up a bit since then. An NPR article identified the official who submitted the court filing as Rick Stover, the Bureau of Prisons Senior Deputy Assistant Director of the Designation and Sentence Computation Center. As the Bureau of Prisons has typically been less than forthcoming with data of that sort, it's good that accurate 2025 information has now been provided by an official BOP source. And that's all I have today. Thank you.
So for WDI France, last Sunday we held our French language webinar for March. Our guest was an autistic scientist, Magali Pignard, and the webinar focused on the links between gender dysphoria. So the webinar focused on the links between gender dysphoria and autism. And it also provided a general overview on the state of science and the lack of scientific rigor in studies on minors' transition. The edited version of the webinar will soon be available on our YouTube channel. In February, we submitted a contribution to CEDAW on sexist stereotypes, and this contribution is now available on the UN website. And we focused on 2 main aspects: the inherent humiliation of women in drag queen performances, and the pressure for gender non-conforming girls, often pejoratively called tomboy or garçon manqué in French, to conform to sex-based social stereotypes. Our conclusion called for replacing the term gender identity with an expression that reflects its true meaning, an identity based on sexist stereotypes. In the fall, we wrote to all the French MPs to raise awareness about minors' transition and to request meetings. We refused very few responses. Last week, we were received by a socialist MP who expressed his deep lack of interest in the issue, as it supposedly concerns only a few children and a few lesbians. We also received an extremely hostile letter from a France Insoumise MP, a member of the far-left political spectrum, who equated our approach with transphobia. We have decided to make our efforts and the responses we received public on our Instagram and Facebook channel. So we are going to communicate about that. Next weekend, for March 8th, there is a demonstration in Barcelona, Spain, and we will bring that demonstration will bring together radical feminists from all over the country, and WDI Spain is calling for participation, and I will be attending and representing both WDI France and the other organization I lead, Les Amazones d'Avignon, and we will unite our forces for this demonstration. That's all.
Okay, this is a report from New Zealand. On Monday, the 3rd of March, oral submissions were heard for the Stalking and Harassment Bill. The Women's Rights Party attended and pointed out that because of the vague wording about causing distress, which is a subjective emotion, gender-critical feminists could be prosecuted for, quote, harassment for not affirming the gender identity of a man or complaining about a man in a woman's space. Using the language of the bill, they recommended that behaviour from person A to person B should only be considered stalking or harassment if 1, it causes B to fear on at least 2 occasions that violence will be used against B or persons associated with B, and or 2, it causes B serious harm, which has a substantial adverse effect on B's usual day-to-day activities. So this would make it a lot more specific and wouldn't catch people with different political opinions in the net. Many submitters gave harrowing accounts of actual stalking, harassment, rape and violence, which we all know can lead to killings, which women had experienced, which were not being adequately addressed by the justice system. So they, on the whole, welcomed the new legislation. Many submitters also talked about how the time limit of 12 months should be removed because stalking and harassment can go on for years. A couple of women from a rainbow group claimed that the rainbow community had suffered increased harassment after Albert Park in 2023 without specifying what that harassment entailed. They also didn't mention the reason for people's anger, which was the violence of the rainbow community against the women present at the Let Women Speak event. These kinds of claims of harassment are exactly the kinds of claims that the Women's Rights Party and gender critical feminists are concerned could lead to wrongful prosecutions of women for speaking up for their rights. In other news, preparations are underway for the screenings of the film Beyond the Looking Glass, directed by Vaishnavi Sundar, who has been invited to New Zealand by the Women's Rights Party. Vaishnavi's film about trans widows will be screened across New Zealand. The first screening is in Auckland on the 1st of April, then in Wellington on the 3rd of April, and on Christchurch on the 6th. Vaishnavi and other speakers will be speaking at each screening, and there will be an opportunity for women to discuss the issues. Participants will be informed of the venue closer to the time. And I'm pleased to say that the Women's Rights Party logo is now on the Women's Declaration International website as a supporting organisation. Coming up very soon, on March the 8th, International Women's Day, the Women's Rights Party is holding an event to launch their petition to make Suffrage Day a public holiday. Women won the vote in New Zealand on the 19th of September 1893, making New Zealand the first country in the world where women won the vote. For many years, Suffrage Day has been celebrated in New Zealand by high-profile women holding Suffrage Day breakfasts. In more recent years, grassroots women have held events on the street to raise awareness about the harms of gender ideology and to oppose sex self-ID. However, overall, Suffrage Day events and celebrations have been rather quiet, and many New Zealanders are not aware of the day. It is not celebrated in public libraries, unlike Pride events, and the suffrage flag is never flown at Parliament, despite the rainbow flag being flown there frequently. The petition organisers say that it's important that New Zealand women and girls are aware of our heritage, and having a public holiday will enable more women to participate in events marking the day. The petition closes on the 18th of September and will be presented to Parliament that day, which is the day before Suffrage Day on the 19th. And you can see the petition on the Parliament website. Thanks. That's it.